We got Daniel Jones and Anthony Richardson battling it out in maybe the most mid-quarterback battle of all time. Najee Harris, new RB1 in Los Angeles. Javonte Williams, the Cowboys savior. We'll see. We got plenty to talk about in today's The Fantasy Life Show. Stay tuned, everyone. Let's get after it. Ian Hartitz and Dwain McFarland coming at you guys. And Dwain, safe to say, a bit more quiet day two of free agency.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit more quiet, but we still have we have a couple of really good ones to talk about. Like, I know we're not starting off with the best one. We're saving it. So folks will have to wait. They're going to have to wait like one. They're going to have to wait for us to talk about Daniel Jones, and then we'll get to one that is actually pretty fun.
Again, we are reacting to all the free agency instantly today. It is, of course, our free agency instant reaction show presented by the fine folks at DraftKings. And as Dwain said, kicking things off with Daniel Jones, Danny Dimes, Vanilla Vic, whatever you want to call him, signing with the Indianapolis Colts on a one-year, $14 million deal with a max value of $17.7 million. So, Dwain, we heard Colts GM Chris Ballard really, I read the quote, brought up open competition a good 3 times in his kind of end of February press conference. This amount of money does pretty much guarantee that, yes, Anthony Richardson will be battling it out for that QB1 spot. Luckily ideal because, as we saw last year, Shane Steichen's certainly willing to pull Richardson off the field if he feels his performance is not going well enough.
Yeah, I mean, it is a significant enough contract that we have to worry that if Richardson's not playing well, to your point, he does get pulled. I think the question is, if it does happen, is there a silver lining for the rest of the players, mainly the wide receivers? And I think that's where it also becomes challenging, Ian, because while it is an upgrade, I mean, if we look at Anthony Richardson, like we've got it here on the screen, 165 yards per game, and then you're looking at 207 for Daniel Jones. So 207 is definitely better than 165. But if you go back and you look at the history of wide receiver scoring, and this is for data from 2011 to 2023, if we look at those quarterbacks that were between 224 passing yards per game, we've had 168 wide receivers run at least 400 routes in an offense like that. And only 15% of them reach wide receiver 2 status, 18% reach wide receiver 3, and 20% reach wide receiver 4. Dwain, you didn't mention wide receiver 1 finishes. Well, that's because there were only 5%. So you do have to be able to, get more out of your passing game to open things up for guys like Josh Downs, who obviously we've seen, like we saw it with Joe Flacco last year, how well he was able to play whenever we didn't have Anthony Richardson on the field. So I think the big challenge for me is I get it. I understand what the Colts are doing. They're trying to motivate Richardson. They have to have some sort of a backstop. But at the same time, it doesn't do a lot for us in fantasy because this is the lowest upgrade you could possibly get from Anthony Richardson going to Daniel Jones.
Now, give Shane Steichen some credit. It's been a constant, just musical chair carousel, whatever you want to call it, under center in Indianapolis, really since Andrew Luck retired. I mean, just going back over these past, couple of years, though, Carson Wentz, as bad as he was in Indianapolis that year, still threw for 27 touchdowns. Then we had Gardner Minshew, who I think we kind of saw in Las Vegas, the reality that this is, more or less a dirt average quarterback who should be a backup. He went 7-6 in 13 starts, with the, again, Shane Steichen Colts. And then even last year, old man Joe Flacco, I know he did well in Cleveland, but hey, 265 passing yards per game, not half bad either. So, Dwain, we've seen Sam Darnold, Ryan Tannehill, some of these, Baker Mayfield reclamation projects, the former high picks, not exactly starting off in the best environment, which I do think, the modern New York Giants qualify as. Do you think that maybe Daniel Jones could, be rejuvenated and, let's face it, probably the best offensive environment of his career?
I mean, there's always a chance for these things, but I mean, I would place it really low. When you have, someone like what we have with Sam Darnold doing what he did last year, obviously your eyes are open to it. The coordinator with Kevin O'Connell, that was obviously a big component. And then you give him Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison. Eventually later in the year, you had TJ Hawkinson. I don't think the Colts weapons are on that level. I also don't think that Steichen's on the same level as Kevin O'Connell as an offensive coordinator. But I'm with you. I'm not against Shane Steichen, right, as an offensive coordinator. And I would say that the Colts do have a nice trio of wide receivers, really a nice duo. And then they've got a third guy, potentially an A.D. Mitchell. We're holding out hope that maybe he can eventually turn into something. Definitely know the big plays are there with A.D. Mitchell if he can get right. So I think there are some weapons. But the big challenge, for me is, Daniel Jones, if you go back to when he was drafted, a lot of people thought that was a big reach even at the time. So his draft capital, how real is it? Like, or was it just the Giants fell in love with him and they took him that early in that draft? So it's possible, but I would say that I would still lean towards no. I mean, could we get like 215 yards passing per game instead of the 205 or 207, whatever it was? Like, I maybe we could get that, but I'm not betting on like 240 or 250 per game.
We'll address your Alec Pierce slander here in a few seconds. But I will say with Daniel Jones, we have at least seen him play a high level of football 1 year. Okay. Looking at his rank in EPA per dropback since he entered the league, he's been 31st, 32nd, 24th in that 2022 season, though, where he went into Minnesota and got that playoff W. Actually was the 12th ranked quarterback, got that big contract, 39th and 33rd place finishes these last 2 seasons. But again, that was with the Giants, obviously not a, great offensive line. They've dabbled with some injuries over these last few years. I know they've had some better players, Andrew Thomas and the such. The receivers, they tried to go out and get him a wide receiver 1 back in the day. Unfortunately, that wide receiver 1 was Kenny Golladay, and then he loses his job before he has a real chance to, get integrated with Malik Neighbors. And now going to Indy, I do agree with you overall, Dwayne, not the world's best receiver group. I think they're almost like the AFC version of Green Bay. I think they're 4 deep, but the problem is none of those 4 are really a true one. I know Michael Pittman
Josh Downs might be.
it.
I think Josh Downs might be. I think we need to see him healthy. Like if you go back and look at like just taking his college profile and then what he's done over the first 2 years, I think there's a chance Josh Downs is. Like I think Josh Downs is better than Jaden Reed. I would say that right now. But he's got to stay healthy. That's been the big issue. Yeah. So we'll see what happens. I mean, obviously quarterback play has also been a challenge for him, but I would love to see Downs get to play with a good quarterback. I will say this, like Daniel Jones, he did have years where he was good for Sterling Shepard. He did have a little brief period there with Kadarius Toney, so he has found a way to really target the slot wide receiver at times. But I will say Downs is more of a vertical kind of slot guy. He can do the stuff underneath, but he's not tethered to the line of scrimmage like some of the other guys that Daniel Jones is really peppered with targets. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Maybe he's enough to stabilize the value for Downs.
Man, those 6 quarters of Toney against the Saints and the Cowboys. Special times, Dwayne. Yeah. Special times. Last point here, again, not trying to say the Colts are blowing the world away here, but in that supporting cast rating I brought up, again, just average of a team's rushing, receiving, pass blocking, run blocking grades, Colts have finished 14th in back-to-back years. Again, better than the lowly Giants who are down there with the Jets as, again, some of the single worst supporting casts in football over the past half decade or so. So, again, I think we can agree, Dwayne, for fantasy purposes, we would rather have Anthony Richardson win this job just because as much as Daniel Jones does have some rushing upside in his own right, actually 8th in terms of fantasy points per game from just rushing over these past 3 seasons. We have Richardson up there in second only behind Jalen Hurts. So overall, Dwayne, if I had to, ask you to set an over-under or maybe just straight up, how many starts do you think Anthony Richardson can have this year? What would you go with?
Man, I don't know. 6? Like, I hate to say that. 6? Like, I really, I mean, I hate to say that. I mean, I don't know, man. Like, what do you want to say? 8, 9? I really don't know, honestly, how to ballpark this. The guy couldn't complete 50% of his passes. Like, it's just really bad. It's hard to win football games when you can't complete passes. So he has to make drastic steps forward in order to unlock a longer leash. Like, there's no way he can come out and just play the way that he did. And so let's assume that he does improve. Okay, great. What does that put him at? Like a 55% completion percentage? Do you think that's enough, Ian, to help him hold on to the job? Or do you think he needs to turn around and be like a 60% kind of guy? Again, it's a tough question because we know what he can do on the ground. He could help the team win football games by actually what he can do with his legs. So you got to put the whole equation together. The big challenge for me and why it's hard for me to go long on it is that we've already seen them bench him. We've already seen them do this with him. They did it in year 2. So it's going to be that much easier in year 3, especially when they just paid Daniel Jones more than they paid Joe Flacco.
And that's the concerning part. Richardson, I really think, could be having a nice 2 or 3 games, but if he puts together 30, 40 minutes of not great football, he could be hitting the bench. And that's going to be really tough for anyone to, fully reach their ceiling, knowing they got to look over their shoulder like that. So Richardson, obviously, even when he got back the starting job towards the end of last year, was flirting with that QB1 borderline in fantasy land. Not going to be someone I think that's even going to be gracing the top 20 in our ranks ahead of next season, just again, because of the honestly likelihood at this point that he's not even going to have double-digit starts under his belt. So between Richardson and Jones, late round lottery tickets, if you want to call around that, maybe more of a scratch off in Daniel Jones's case. But hey, still a situation where, in super flex leagues could do worse than a quarterback who, when they have been out there, we have at least seen a ceiling to be had. Let's move along though, Dwayne, because we have a big running back signing. Actually went ahead and kicked in last evening. Najee Harris coming to Los Angeles to become Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman's new RB1. Signed a base $5.25 million deal, but it can be worth up to $9.25 million across just 1 year. So Gus Edwards already got released. It looks like J.K. Dobbins, is at the end of his tenure with the Chargers, leaving only Kamani Vidal, Hassan Haskins, and yes, RB1 Najee Harris. So I know Steelers fans are out there. No one really seems to like Najee Harris, Dwayne. He's not the most explosive guy in the world. Doesn't have that one-hitter quitter, home run speed or anything like that. But sure seems like the Chargers like him enough to potentially give him 300-plus touches. Not saying the interior of their offensive line is some, world-beating group. But, I'm old enough to remember, Dwayne, another running back who was a little bit maligned, if you will, during his first stop, maybe 4 years spent, in a lesser offense, all of a sudden finds his way somewhere good, and then all of a sudden breaks his way into the hearts of fantasy football faithful. So I'm going to pull up a graphic here, Dwayne, player A, player B, got some underwhelming stats. Do you dare take a little guess at who I may be talking about?
So one of these players is Najee Harris.
Okay, good call. Good job.
I mean, since we are doing a Najee Harris segment, I will say Najee Harris. So he's on the right. So who are the players that are the most like Najee Harris? Najee Harris doesn't have a major explosive play rate. He does have the archetype, though, to handle a heavy workload. He can get carries inside the 5-yard line. So like that kind of fits J.K. Dobbins, who was there last year. I would say it fits David Montgomery.
You got it. Look at this guy. It's not like you knew it before the show or anything, but yes, that is true. Player A, Najee Harris. Player B, David Montgomery. So you guys can see our handy dandy graphic right here. Shout out to the YouTube faithful. And yeah, we actually have Najee working as the better running back during the first 4 years of his career compared to Demon, what he was able to do in Chicago. And yes, guys, believe it or not, that Steelers offensive line actually ranked 30th in yards before contact per carry. Montgomery was dealing with more of a league average group in Chicago. So again, you can talk about Montgomery being a little bit better receiver, which is true, but Najee, even in that first year of Big Ben, man, a lot of them just, pure checkdowns. Ben was even looking downfield at that point in his career, did still manage to catch 74 passes. So all I'm trying to get across with this, I'm not trying to say Najee's just top 5 running back, top 10 even, not trying to gaslight you guys, but Dwayne, we've seen guys like Kyron Williams, Joe Mixon, inefficient running backs who don't seem to be all that good, land in really good offenses, get that volume, and accordingly give us bunches of fantasy points. Why can't Najee do that with the Chargers?
Well, look, I mean, it's not like anyone really likes Najee Harris. I don't think it's just like fans. I mean, no NFL team really stepped up to give this guy a bigger contract, which is wild considering he was a first-round pick. He's still a young player. Typically, that's a recipe for getting a nice contract. But having said all that, to your point, the landing spot is really great. We like the Chargers offense. We know they're going to be committed to running the ball. He's the archetype of player that Greg Roman and Harbaugh also love. They want to pound the rock with this big physical player. Najee Harris checks those boxes. I think the real key here is what happens in the NFL draft. We've got a very deep draft class as far as the rookie running backs go, so he could still have competition added. But it's not like Vidal really did anything last year. You mentioned it. Gus Edwards is gone. We'll see. They might still be able to bring J.K. Dobbins back, who could challenge Najee for some opportunities. But if he can run pure, he's on an offense that we like that is committed to doing it. You've got a good quarterback. That can mean red zone opportunities for you. I think the real key is if he could start playing on passing downs again, Ian. Playing with Jaylen Warren, like that's tough. Jaylen Warren, we're going to talk about him more in just a minute. Like he's a good running back. We don't know if he can be a really good running back in a large sample, but we know in small samples, he's been someone that's been very good out of the backfield as a receiver. Worked on his ability as a blocker as well. So those are just some things where Najee gave up that role. In his first year when he scored all those fantasy points, he had all of that. And right now, when I look at it, I know Kamani Vidal, we held out hope for it last year, but he never really took over that offense as far as the passing down back. He was only occasionally getting sprinkled in there. Yes, he was just a rookie, but it's not like he's got high draft capital. So I could very easily see this team trusting Najee only on the 1-year deal, completely loading him up. Is he a guy that's going to wow you in any of these areas? No, but he is one of these players, Ian, where it won't surprise me if we look back and we're like, wow, they trusted Najee with every aspect of the offense. And if he gets to play on those passing downs, especially if they don't add someone else to compete for targets outside of Ladd McConkey, like, man, he could have targets in the range of what he had his rookie season. And if he does that, he's going to finish as a running back 1 in fantasy football, whether or not he looks electric or not.
Likely the best offense of his career in terms of scoring upside. I mean, Steelers never ranked higher than 16th over these past 4 years. Even in year 1 of figuring things out with Greg Roman and Harbaugh, Justin Herbert and company were good enough to fulfill a top 11 finish. So again, I mentioned Kyren Williams and Joe Mixon as kind of like the high-end outcomes, the hopeful, Najee Harris fantasy, just hopefuls we can get there. But even then, Dwain, James Conner, David Montgomery, these two guys that are just always in that low-end RB2 conversation, I'm going to be hard-pressed to rank Najee any lower than those guys. Again, we'll see what happens during the draft. That can always change things, but really does seem like a situation where I just think that the idea that Najee's this boring player and no one, again, the public or to your point, the NFL seems to overly like him. I mean, we're going to have a real chance here to maybe get that round 6, round 7 running back who, again, once we start grinding those projections, once we start looking at the week 1 ranks, it's going to be tough to move them that low because, again, 20 plus touches a week, man, unless you're Kalen Ballage out here, it's really tough to bust when you're getting that much opportunity.
Yeah, you did think of a guy that did bust in that scenario. That is a good recall by you, Hartitz. Yeah. So, I mean, when you look at Najee Harris right now, I mean, he's running back 32. Obviously, he's going to start moving up. This is over on Underdog right now. Best ball drafts are already going crazy. If you look at DraftKings, you got something similar. So, Najee Harris, how high can he go, Ian? It's like, I get it. We've got the rookies that people are going to be more excited about. But right now at 32, like, I'm just scrolling up. Like Chuba Hubbard's running back 16. Like Chuba Hubbard might have as much risk of having a rookie. All these guys could have risk of having a rookie added, even though they drafted Jonathan Brooks the year before. But I feel like you're talking about Joe Mixon just above that, who you mentioned a second ago. You got Chase Brown, who just had Samaje Perine return to his team. He could have someone added in the draft. So a lot of these guys that are in that range really could be in that similar situation to Najee. But to me, at this point, like I think you got to treat him more like a mid-range running back too, is where I would be.
And again, Mixon, Kyren Williams, look at any stat you want from last year. They were both really bad. They've been bad for most of their careers, but they're in offenses that trust them. They're in still good offenses that can score points. And accordingly, they were good enough to provide us RB1 value far more weeks than not last season. So again, we'll make it through the draft and see what happens. But Najee's certainly in a better spot today than he was yesterday. Same scenario, though, is true, Dwain. For one, Jaylen Warren, we can now move over to the Pittsburgh Steelers, Najee's former employer. Hopefully now looking at Warren as the RB1 that he's never quite gotten that full chance to be. Still an opportunity for an NFL team to go ahead and get him if they want, but we did see Warren tendered at a second round level as he is a restricted free agent right now. Usually when you do see that second round price tag thrown out for restricted free agents, seldomly do they end up actually leaving the team. So really, Dwain, it's one of these situations where yes, Najee Harris has looked like, and he's been the worst running back in Pittsburgh over these years, but the thing is, if you look at Jaylen Warren's numbers across the rest of the league, it's not so much that, he's been average and Najee's been bad. It's more so been Jaylen Warren's been one of the very best running backs in the league, whereas Najee hasn't been. Because guess what? There's Jaylen Warren. There's almost everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, you've got it here, like the missed tackles forced per attempt or tackles avoided per rush, sitting there at 30%. That's well above the league average of 17%. You've got his yards after contact, 3.4. The league average is 2.9. And then if you look at that explosive run rate, sitting there right at 10%, the league average on that is 9. So Jaylen is above all of the averages for the NFL for starting running backs, to your point. And he's just one of these guys, man. Like, I know last year he was a guy that we drafted a lot, and really the thesis around him was, look, he's got a lot of outs. He's going to need some help. You got Najee Harris still on the team. Right now, as we sit here today, again, someone else could go after him with the tender. We've also talked about the NFL draft. Very likely that they add someone here. But there's a chance right now, we've got the best chance that we've had in years of Warren actually being the lead back for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I do think he's a guy, Ian, and very curious, like your thoughts on this. He's also, like, even though he's a guy that, came in as the complimentary back, he's not small. Like this is this he's not as big as Najee Harris, obviously, but that's a really big guy. But this is a guy that has the frame, I think, that he could handle a workload of 65% of the rushing attempts. We already talked about what he can do on the passing downs, and he's also got this electric playmaking ability. When you put all of that together, if he runs pure and he avoids, a really good backfield mate through the draft or through free agency, which free agency, most of those guys are gone at this point. Man, like if they don't draft a running back in the first 3 rounds, how high are you moving Jaylen Warren?
I mean, you are splitting the backfield with a true king in Cordero Patterson. Let's make that very clear. Okay, first
it
of
is
all.
Arthur Smith. Hey, he's gonna let someone else touch the ball. This is true.
He will. He will. But man, this is legit RB1. Okay. We've seen him have the opportunity. Okay. We have not seen him have the opportunity, but again, on the per touch just basis over like last year, Dwain, Najee Harris, shout out, not missed a game in the NFL, 17 games each and every year. Best ability is availability. Shout out to Najee. But like if it was week 8 last year, Najee goes down. I think we would be ranking Warren confidently as a top 10 running back. I don't know that we're going to do that entering week 1, but that's where the ceiling is. Gen Z, Austin Eckler. That's what we're looking at.
Yeah, I'm with you. So that's the ceiling. The ceiling really is running back 1. And that was one of the outs last year. If something did happen to Najee, or just perhaps the Steelers had decided, we just want to give the ball to the more efficient guy. We talked about that running back 1 ceiling with Warren, and he does check all of the boxes for that. So I am with you. I know it's a little tough right now because this does feel like a team that will add someone in the draft. So we'll have to get through that. But yeah, right now the skies are looking pretty bright. Like the outlook is very bright for Mr. Jaylen Warren.
We'll say, again, similar to the Vikings, who are going to be getting a nice 3rd-round comp pick for Sam Darnold. We'll see how all those shake out. But Steelers are another one of these teams where they don't have the, just abundance of top 100 picks where they might actually be able to go out there and get one of those shiny running backs to really worry about. I mean, they're picking 21st in the 1st round. Kind of doubt they're going to be using that, on a new running back. And then Dwain, as it stands right now, not picking again until pick 83 in round 3. So maybe they use a running back there. But again, if we're only getting day 3 competition here for Jaylen Warren, wheels up all the way. You did mention that Arthur Smith over these past few seasons has preferred to use more than one running back, and it's been consistent really regardless of who he has had. In 2021, Cordero Patterson had 205 touches, Mike Davis 182, then Tyler Algier led the way with just a team-high 226 touches. Rookie year, Bijan Robinson, 272 touches. That was cool. Tyler Algier still had 204 though, and then last year was 251 to 177. 299 to 158 between Najee and Warren. So actually grew it a bit more last season. Part of that was Jaylen Warren missing some early season action, but it is a situation, Dwain, where again, if you were running through the projections, I do think you'd be hard pressed to give Warren more than 215, 220 carries. The real part where I think you could gain some steam is in that pass game, number 6 and number 5 in yards per route run and targets per route run among all running backs since he entered the league. Again, that's where that Eckler comp comes from, because Warren is one of these guys where if he gets the opportunity, man, 60, 70 catches could be on the table.
Yeah, and I mean, we don't have to worry about Justin Fields at this point, right? Being the quarterback, turning some of those dropbacks into scrambles. So you have a pass play, then turn into a run play. You did add DK Metcalf to the offense. So now you've got him and Pickens to feed in the passing game. That could create a little bit of a cap on a guy like Warren, but it's not like Pat Freiermuth has really stepped forward and been like this high-end target earner. I would still think Freiermuth probably finishes ahead of Warren in the pecking order in the passing game. But I mean, I could see him being the 4th guy. I could see him being the 4th guy in the offense. Then it really comes down to, okay, what is that going to be worth in an offense we know that still wants to run the ball quite a bit? I think like we've talked about with the wide receivers yesterday, a lot of how we'll ultimately feel, besides what happens in the draft, will come down to what do they do at quarterback. If they put a quarterback on the field that we feel like can support all of these weapons, we're going to feel even better about Warren. But if they get stuck in a situation where it's someone that we don't feel very good about, that is going to hurt his value as well. So yeah, I'm with you totally on the same page as far as what he could do in the passing game is really a way that he could pop off in 2025 for fantasy football. And it's something that we have seen from him very consistently. I know it's been over small samples, but every year we've seen it from him. So I think that's something that we can feel confident in. It's just going to be a little tougher with DK Metcalf there also to feed.
again, still have those three pretty clear starting jobs open between the Titans, the Steelers, and the Giants. You would like to think the Titans just grab Cam Ward, and then we see Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson fill those other two spots. And honestly, in that case, I mean, that would be pretty great news for Warren. You're getting a veteran quarterback without too much mobility these days. We saw Russ in Denver really feed his running backs a lot, and obviously Rodgers or Breece Hall and those guys last year, certainly going to be more willing to check the ball down than he might have been in his younger years. So, Dwayne, we do have some breaking news hot off the press. Yes, that's right. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, 2-year deal, $6.5 million with the Dolphins. But critics are saying he actually already scored a touchdown since he has landed there. So, man, Dwayne, like top 10, top 12, what's he going to be, like a wide receiver 6 for you? This sucks, man. Why do you go to the Dolphins?
Well, look, I just can't believe you didn't get a contract for $10 million. I felt like every contract I've seen is 1 year, 10 mil. Couldn't even get that. But yeah, look, he's going to be buried. Do we have to keep talking about him? Please no. Please say no. No,
that's all I wanted to bring up. But yeah, that is wild, man. How $6.5 million? Come on, guy scored 9 touchdowns last year. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, maybe next time, man. But all right, let's talk about another man who did not make all that much money, but all of a sudden, Dwayne, it's hard not to be a bit more excited because the landing spot is borderline erotic. That's right, the Cowboys signed former Broncos RB1 Javonte Williams to a 1-year deal worth just $3.5 million. We are hearing on the rumors on the street, if you will, that this does mean Rico Dowdle will not be returning. So look, Dwayne, just $3.5 million here. Now, we saw the Cowboys lean into Zeke and obviously Rico Dowdle last season. There wasn't a lot of money there. All the way back in 2015, we had Joseph Randle and Darren McFadden not exactly have that much money. They were still able to get featured roles from that Cowboys offense. So I don't want to completely, dismiss the idea that Javonte could maybe work his way up in the top of the depth chart, but you would like to think this is more so RB2 money, and the real RB1 for the Cowboys is still waiting to hear his name called here come late April.
Yeah, I think that's probably the plan here. But I mean, Javonte right now sits atop the depth chart, and who knows, maybe the Cowboys get sniped on the guy that they want, and then they decide to get cute like the Cowboys do, and they want to wait another round, and then the other running backs that they wanted are also gone. So you don't know what for sure is going to happen. I agree with you what the plan is, but as of today, Javonte would be the leading back on the team. Honestly, like, I don't want to trash Javonte, but I don't get it. Like, I don't know what Rico Dowdle's going to end up getting on the market, but if it's anything close to this, like, why didn't you just stick with him? It's not that we think Dowdle's great, but he was the more efficient back of the two. Javonte, a couple of seasons ago, Ian, we were very excited about him, but since the LCL, MCL issue that he had in 2022, he's just not been the same, and we've really seen that for 2 seasons. Great, we give him a pass in 2023, but to see the same thing in 2024, that's really tough to think that something is going to change. Now, he still is a young player. He'll only be 25 when the season starts. But if we look at his yards after contact, man, those first 21 games of his career, sitting there at 3.5, the last 2 years, 2.7 and 2.4, right? So below the league average. And then those first 2 years, 33% missed tackles forced per attempt. The last 2 seasons sitting around 15%, again, below the league average of 17%. And then the explosive rush rate as well, 12 and 15% in those first 2 years, dropped down to 10 and 9% over these last 2. So look, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was a brutal injury. So maybe he's just now, maybe the Cowboys feel that he is going to be healthier. It's just hard to like project that at this point. You have to kind of think that maybe Javonte has lost a step. And guys, look, Ian and I were 2 of the people out here loving talking about Javonte when he was breaking out in 2021 and 2022, trucking people, juking people out of their shoes. I mean, the guy had a true blend of make you miss, run you over, a combination that you don't see a lot in running backs, and Javonte really did have it. Also, has been good in the pass game. Now I don't know how much of that is a boost due to Sean Payton. If you play running back and you play in Sean Payton's scheme, targets per route run over the last 2 years, 23 and 32%. Yeah. So maybe he gets a little more involved in the passing game here. But I struggle to make the projection that we're going to suddenly see him return to that form that we saw in 2022 before the injury.
Because again, last year really should have been a good situation for Javonte to regain that form. He was a full year removed from the injury, and he was getting to play behind what ended up finishing as PFF's number 2 offensive line in the NFL. The problem was PFF also grades running backs, and Javonte was dead last in terms of their rushing grade for him. So again, can't speak enough about how special that rookie season was. Get your Vince McMahon memes out and all that. He literally, Dwayne, I know we just kind of throw around some of these advanced stats, and maybe people don't have the proper context for it, but 31% missed tackles force rate rate as a rookie. That is the single highest mark in True Media's database among running backs who have had, again, at least 200 carries in a season. So you look at some of the highlights against the Ravens, even some against the Cowboys during that year. I mean, just pushing piles, 10 plus yards at a time, it seemed. God forbid the Cowboys could get that guy back in action. It'd be pretty sweet. But again, thinking just based on the money and based on the reality that they're probably going to need to draft one of these guys in the top 100 picks, thinking that Javonte, again, probably looking at more of an RB2 role. But hey, we'll see what happens come late April. So hope you guys have been enjoying, again, our free agency instant reactions presented by DraftKings. Much, much more on the way. We got some tight ends and wide receivers to talk about. First, though, a quick word to our friends over at DraftKings. Who's scoring big in the NBA this season? You are, with all the new ways to get in on the action with my partners at DraftKings Sportsbook. From Monster Slams to dishing the rock to cleaning the glass, get behind your favorite players and the prop bets you can make on DraftKings, the home of NBA player props. Here's something special for first timers. New DraftKings customers bet just $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Take it to the rack with DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the DraftKings app now and sign up using promo code FANTASYLIFE. The crown is yours. All right, Dwain, couple tight end deals that have happened within the last few days that, yes, matter mightily in fantasy football land because these guys are going to be sitting pretty atop their depth charts. Starting off with the Washington Commanders. That's right, Zach Ertz is back on a one-year, $6.25 million deal. Sorry, Ben Sinnott truthers, looking like it could be another year waiting patiently behind the ageless wonder. So, man, 35 in November, Ertz is going to be, Dwain, but at the same time, he's kind of been this slow for a while now. I don't think that we're looking at necessarily a different version of Ertz than even, 5 or so years ago. And as we saw, literally his last time out when he caught, 11 balls for 104 yards against the Eagles, this man has the trust of Jaden Daniels and honestly still looks capable of filling up the stat sheet. Going to be a bit more competition this time around with Deebo Samuel in there. But man, Dwain, I still remember sitting here every Thursday and more times than not, your sicko start of the week with Zach Ertz. And guess what? The man finished as a tight end 10 in PPR points per game. What's stopping him from doing it again in the encore?
I was really hoping that it could be Senate season, but yeah, you get Zach Ertz back. Now, look, to your point, like we've known his prime has been gone for a long time. Like his last season in his prime was 2019. But he's still been able to keep producing when he's given these chances. So what's to make us think that he won't be able to still come in as a low-end tight end one? It would have to be losing time to the younger player that they spent a high draft pick on last season. And so we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. This could still just be an insurance policy with Ertz where they're saying, hey, if our young tight end comes on, we'll let him end up playing more. But if not, we know that we have Zach Ertz. We also have Deebo Samuel's been added to this offense. Obviously, Terry McLaurin, had his best season last year, Ian, as far as having a quarterback that can actually dial it up and throw him the football. So it is a situation where depending on what happens with Deebo, we could also have a more crowded room. We also have Austin Eckler, who was battling injuries last year, who's a nice receiver out of the backfield. So there could be a few more weapons here. I know they've subtracted Dyami Brown, who we'll talk about here in a minute, but it's not like he was earning a lot of targets. So Ertz, when I look at it, it's like you said. He was the guy that I had to make my sicko call every week. So whenever we talk about preseason rankings, I still don't see myself getting him inside the top 12. I feel like there's enough risk with a young player behind him. But would it surprise us if he finishes as tight end 10 again? No, it absolutely would not. And so if he is a guy that you can take super late in your drafts, especially in best ball where you know you're going to have to take two of them, then I think Ertz can make a little bit more sense in that sort of format. You're not going to be super excited about clicking on it. But to your point, like continues to come through when given the chance.
Just seems like inevitable at this point, Dwain, where again, he's not going to be someone people are drafting in, typical one tight end leagues without premium scoring or anything. But we're just a week 1, 6 catches, 55 yards and a touchdown performance away from him being on those waiver wire articles. And all of a sudden, everyone's like, oh, yeah, Zach Ertz is still out there doing his thing. So, again, once you start kind of getting past those top 12, top 15 tight ends, you got your Jake Fergusons of the world. You got some of the Colston, Loveland, Jaylen Warren rookies. You start seeing Kate Otten, Pat Freiermuth, Cole Kmet's in that mid to low end tight end 2 range. Again, wouldn't really fault anyone for prioritizing all 3 of those players over Ertz necessarily, but we believe in this Washington offense. We've seen Daniels be willing to feed Ertz the rock more than anyone not named Terry McLaurin. Would not discount, again, old man Ertz, putting forward something close to, again, that borderline tight end one season. We'll say, though, Dwain, tight end does seem to be the position where we have our guys at the top, the George Kittles, the Brock Bowers, Trey McBrides of the world at this point. We know they can actually give us, those 13 to 15 fantasy points per game. Even if Ertz does manage to get that, tight end 10 finish or so, it's a situation where, the difference between tight end 10 and tight end 16 probably isn't going to be all that wide anyway. So more than anything, again, if you want to, just tack on that second tight end in best ball at the very end of your drafts, okay, go ahead. But we'd still like to be shooting, for a bit higher ceiling than we're getting here. Don't think you should be, someone we're actively going to drafts trying to come away with.
Yeah. Do we have to talk about Zach Ertz anymore?
If you want to, but we can also talk about...
Can we just keep going?
Let's get to him. Mike Gesicki, everyone. Now, really funny story with this. If you guys caught it, in the last week or two, Joe Burrow basically said, we got to get the guys paid, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Mike G. Mike Gesicki later talking about that in a press conference said he was basically like the meme that we've all seen, the dude just pointing at himself. Even Gesicki was, surprised that Joe Burrow himself was saying they need to get Mike back in Cincy, but they did manage to do so on a 3-year, $25.5 million deal. It was funny to me, Dwain, hearing, some of the quote unquote insiders and just national reporters saying after Gesicki's breakout season, he got this deal because, yeah, he was actually more productive in Miami back in the 2020-2021 seasons, just had the two disappointing years in New England, and then obviously broke back out, if you will, with the Bengals last season. But at the same time, a lot of that did come, a lot of the bigger performances, I should say, did come when T. Higgins was sidelined. I mean, this was a situation where far more weeks than not, Dwain, we couldn't even get Gesicki sniffing a 50 or 60% route rate, as they like to continue rotating these guys. So by the end of the year, we did get back-to-back performances with that route rate over that magic 70% number we like to see. Given the money on the table now, Dwain, do you think we see Gesicki more so work as almost that full-time big slot receiver and maybe give us some of that, tight end one goodness that we actually were starting to get during the second half of last season?
Well, I will say the other component was Eric All. And once he left the lineup, in week 10, that did open up more work for Gesicki. Now, it didn't mean that it guaranteed like he was getting all these routes. He still had some weird games in there, like there was a 37% route participation in week 14, 50% in week 15. To your point, at the very end of the season, he had those two games at the end where they were trying, the Bengals were basically, hey, we got to win to get into the playoffs, 72 and 78% route participation in those games. So I think it's pretty tough to say, like, will they suddenly unleash like this 75, 80% route participation? Because the problem is, like, if you want to run the ball and you want to have a threat of running the ball, Mike Gesicki's not the tight end that you want to have on the field. So I could still see a scenario, early downs, you want to get under center on some of those, probably not going to have Mike Gesicki on the field. So some of it's going to come down to the type of game plan that you've got for the opponent. The other part's going to come down to how's the game script going? Oh, you're down 14-0. Well, you're throwing out your 21 personnel playbook and you're just going to, getting all your wide receivers and tight ends on the field so that Joe Burrow can air it out. And I think that's also a part of the driver, right, that we saw in the ups and downs with Gesicki. So even though he got paid some, I still think it's going to be more of the same because he's got this, this thing missing from his game. We saw the same thing with Mike McDaniel. He actually, once he got there and they moved more to using, some of those heavy personnel looks, Gesicki wasn't a part of them. It's when they were in obvious passing situations, they put him on the field. So I think with players like this, even, Evan Ingram, maybe to a lesser extent, like you really do have to land like in that scheme where you've got the play caller that's willing to give up a little bit in the run blocking department to know that you have a receiver on the field at tight end, if the quarterback wants to call an audible, whatnot. So while I like Gesicki, I think most of his value is going to come down to if you have games without T. Higgins or Jamar Chase. You already did a good job highlighting that. All of his biggest games really came in those moments without T. Higgins.
Eric All is unfortunately going to be missing the rest of 2025 as well as he continues to deal with those complicated knee injuries. So one less guy for him to worry about. But again, tapping anything close to, his ceiling in fantasy land, I do think Dwain is unfortunately right as a longtime Gesicki truther talking here. That again, is going to be tough for him to get too much going. As we've seen with Joe Burrow throughout his career, usually more than happy to, again, mostly just force feed his two baller wide receivers on the outside. But hey, those two baller wide receivers still want a lot of money, and Cincy hasn't given it to him just yet. So again, wouldn't completely discount on Big Mike G putting together, again, a solid second season there in Cincy. So good stuff there. Still got some good wide receiver contracts we want to talk about, guys. First, though, a quick word from our friends over at Bud Light.
Hey, you're not actually allowed to drink in a beer commercial?
Since when?
You gotta wait till it's done. Oh,
5,
4, 3, 2, 1.
The wide receiver class is pretty weak, Dwayne, when we are getting to Dyami Brown as one of the biggest signings of the early portions of free agency. 1 year, $10 million deal with the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Christian Kirk is out. Josh Reynolds, who, yes, actually was on the Jaguars, also out. Now we're looking at a 3 wide receiver set of Gabe Davis, Dyami Brown, and yes, of course, Mr. Brian Thomas Jr. So would you say 200, 250, maybe 300 targets for BTJ this year, Dwayne?
Let's go with 500. Can we go with 500? Okay. Yeah, you've got 2 guys that are not high-end target earners. If you look at Dyami Brown, targets per route run last year, 15%. The year before that, 14. The year before, 14. We kind of know what he is. Now, what was interesting with Dyami Brown last year is he really, his role changed, Ian. He's really been more traditionally a guy that stretches the field, right? He's this guy that you want to use in the vertical aspect of your game. We're already kind of using Gabe Davis, right? In that way, that's the one thing that we feel like Gabe Davis can kind of do well. He's not necessarily a well-rounded route, technician, if you will, that's going to work all these layers of the field. So last year, Dyami Brown did operate close to the line of scrimmage. His ADOT dropped down to 7.5 after the year before being 17. The year before that 27, the year before that 16. So maybe they've got a little bit more of a plan for him, but it is hard to get excited about Dyami Brown in this offense. I mean, look, he's not as good as Christian Kirk. He's not going to be as good as losing Evan Ingram from your offense. So yes, I am with you. Brian Thomas Jr. is going to be getting, can we give him 90% of the targets at this point? Brian Thomas Jr. is gonna get everything.
Look, I don't want to be the guy who's like, oh, he's playing the, Cooper Kupp role in this offense. We always love to just take the new coach and put him in that. At this point, though, who's the best option in the slot?
Yeah.
But I think Brian Thomas Jr. is going to get his usual stuff downfield. But we even heard Liam Cohen talking in his press conferences about wanting to use BTJ in the slot. Now, I don't always put that much stock in that sort of stuff because sometimes you got to take into account the question they were asked in the first place. And also the reality that a lot of wide receivers move into the slots for, purpose spurts of a game, not necessarily the full time. But Gabe Davis, certainly someone that's going to be sticking to the outside. And Dyami Brown was mostly an outside wide receiver in Washington as well. We saw what Cohen did for Chris Godwin last year, man. And Godwin's a great player and everything, but a lot of those targets he was getting were designed, short, low ADOT stuff by the line of scrimmage. I mean, if Brian Thomas Jr. is getting that stuff on top of some downfield opportunities that we know he can just go out there and win, I know we already have the dude ranked wide receiver 6, wide receiver 7, but that might be too low.
Yeah, I mean, Brian Thomas Jr., the challenge you start to run into is above him, you've got Amon-Ra St. Brown right now in ADP and Nico Collins. You can make the argument to move him past those 2 guys. Yeah. Amon-Ra, it's tough because that Amon-Ra has done it multiple years. But we also saw Amon-Ra regress a little bit last year. Ian, the introduction of Jamison Williams into your offense, Sam Laporta probably playing hurt the first half of the year, him coming back at the end of the year and looking more like what we saw from him as a rookie on a team that likes to run the ball a lot. So you've now suddenly got a situation in Detroit where it's not that Amon-Ra St. Brown is any different. He's still the sun god. We still love him, but you've got to spread this ball around more. And then you look at Brian Thomas Jr., it's like, oh man, you don't have to spread the ball around. But then you're like, the Lions have a really good offense. We don't know yet if the Jaguars are going to have a good offense. We've never seen the Jaguars have an offense like what the Lions have, one of the top 3 scoring offenses in the NFL, and that's the way we'll be projecting them again next year. So it just gets tough. I wouldn't blame anybody if they want to do it. The guy that I would mention is, what if Brenton Strange? He did it a little bit last year when we had Evan Ingram out. Evan Ingram obviously now gone. We've talked about Gabe Davis. We've talked about the situation with Dyami Brown. Don't think we necessarily see either one of those players turning in anything. Brenton Strange was a 2nd-round pick out of Penn State a couple of years ago. So I think that's kind of the sleeper. It's all in on Brian Thomas Jr. And if there's a sleeper right now in the passing game ahead of the NFL draft, as well as who knows? Maybe they sign one of these other guys in free agency. I would say that it might be Brenton Strange, the tight end.
actually a pair of Nittany Lions who could feasibly make some noise. Obviously, Brenton Strange and Parker Washington, who I don't want to completely forget about. He actually did wind up taking a lot of snaps in the slot last year after Christian Kirk went down. I hear you on Brenton Strange. And hey, we did see, Cohen willing to basically leave Cade Otton out there for a full-time role. And during those 3 or 4 games we did have with no Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, my God, Cade Otton was putting up like legit wide receiver 1 level numbers. Lord knows he was certainly the tight end 1 during those 3 or 4 weeks. I just questioned, Dwayne, like, how far are we really going to be able to put Brenton Strange up in the ranks? It feels like one of these guys where everyone's, talking about him, and then you actually look at their rankings, and he's going to be tight end 19 or tight end 20. So I'm not dismissing the idea that he can have a full-time role.
20% targets per route run last year. So, the dude did step up
Dalton
in a big
Kincaid
way,
too, though.
so.
Would you rank him ahead of Dalton Kincaid, who's going to be like tight end 15?
I don't know, maybe. I'm working on my rankings on Friday. He's got a 1.49 yards per route run. I don't think we have to say these are guys that someone's going to draft as like the tight end 6, right? We're in the off season. If you're asking the potential winner and it's not Brian Thomas Jr., like right now, I would say the chip would definitely go on Brenton Strange. And then we'll just see what happens. Like, do they draft anybody else? If they don't, maybe he continues to slowly move up. But we do like to invest in young players. Am I going to put him over Dalton Kincaid? Probably not, because he's a first round pick, but I don't know where I'm going to end up having Dalton Kincaid in my ranks, but I don't know. I think we talk about a lot of players that have less upside than what we might get with Brenton Strange.
Maybe I'm just being a hater, a tight end party pooper. I just feel like this guy in no world is going to be getting drafted in normal 1 tight end leagues next year. So the whole Brenton Strange season outbreak going on, maybe a little bit too much, but might just be a cranky old man here yelling at the clouds, Dwayne. So I appreciate you calling me out on that. And again, we will see how high up Brenton Strange does get in the rankings very soon here over at fantasylife.com. I actually just got my rankings up today. Have to peep that for yourself to see where I have Mr. Strange. Keeping it with some other wide receiver deals, though, Dwayne. Predictably, we did have the Chiefs go ahead and re-sign Hollywood Brown virtually to the same deal he had last year, 1 year up to $11 million. So again, entering week 1 of last season, we're expecting to see Hollywood Brown being, more of that intermediate threat, Rashee Rice underneath, and then Xavier Worthy, lifting the top off defenses. However, not exactly how things went. We had Hollywood Brown out until week 15 or week 16. Rashee Rice taken out by friendly fire, Mr. Patrick Mahomes, and then Xavier Worthy really didn't emerge as that field stretcher until very late in the season, wound up being a bit more effective on the sort of routes that Rashee Rice honestly was making his hay with. So in addition to that Hollywood Brown news, we did actually have Xavier Worthy get charged with a felony domestic violence charge. However, he was not, he was arrested on it and then he was not charged. All right. A little bit confusing there. So excuse me. But as always, with these sort of situations, I go to auction and lawyer expert Drew Davenport and his quote on the following, Dwayne. We don't know enough about the Worthy case to know what will happen, and the Rice case is stuck at the starting line. Again, Drew's words here. I think it's entirely possible that both wide receivers will be eligible to play when the season begins. Does that mean there will be no suspensions? Of course not, but I wouldn't assume anything for either guy yet. So a lot to flush out there, Dwayne. I think we can just kind of let that Worthy and Rice situation be until we know more. But at least with, Marquise Brown, of course, Antonio Brown's cousin, there have been some good years in the past, but my God, if there's ever a player that we could just have the injury gods chill out for one season, man, it would be the artist known as Hollywood.
Yeah, and that's the challenge with him. Like, we don't know for sure what would have happened last year. You talked about it, the injury early in the year that caused him to be out until week 16. We did get to see him through the playoffs, so we got a little bit of a sample there. They did slowly ramp up his route participation over those last 3 games, including the Super Bowl, sitting at a 73% route participation. Was just never able to really get anything going. The targets were there. Targets per route run, 25%, but he wasn't in a full-time role, and so I don't know. It's just tough to say because he had been out all season, didn't have the chemistry with Mahomes. You would think he was probably in good condition. It was an upper body injury, a sternoclavicular injury. Yeah. So he should have been fine as far as like his conditioning, but the timing and those things were obviously not there. So it's tough whenever you have these sort of situations and there's layers because we can't always nail down why it didn't work out. Is it because really Hollywood isn't as good as we think that he is? Or is it just because he couldn't quite get on the same page with Mahomes because he was injured all season? I will say this, though. We've seen quite a few receivers now. Like it's almost like they either click or they don't click with Patrick Mahomes, right? I mean, you have some guys that he's just going to always go back to, and it happened to Xavier Worthy early in the year. Like, he was really struggling. Finally, they started to get some mojo going late in the season. A lot of that because they designed more things for him. But you just wonder, like Hollywood Brown, if he's able to play through all of training camp, does that change the way, right, that it really worked out last year? I don't think we can say definitively one way or another, but to your point, we have at least seen Hollywood Brown be good in the past. I don't think we should expect what we saw from him in the past, but even a step down from that in the Chiefs could still be something that you're drafting as, say, a wide receiver 4, potentially wide receiver 5 in fantasy land. It's going to be interesting to see like where his ADP moves now that folks know that he's back with the Chiefs.
It is funny how when we kind of go through like the best landing spots, we've always been naming the Chiefs and the Bills as these two spots where, yeah, they have Mahomes and Josh Allen. Why couldn't some new wide receiver come there and just absolutely put up bonkers numbers? But again, aside from Tyreek Hill and Stephon Diggs, really haven't seen much consistency out of either group over these past few seasons. Obviously, injuries got in the way of Rice's big 2024. But speaking of those Bills, Dwayne, there is a new wide receiver for Josh Allen to maybe enable to greater heights, and his name is one Josh Palmer. 3 years, $36 million for the man who's averaged 571 receiving yards in his previous 4 years. So a lot of times, we have these receivers coming from, bad quarterbacks, and we can say, oh man, look what he can do with Josh Allen. Not quite the same here, given how good, again, Justin Herbert is at slinging it in his own right. So don't worry, everyone. I'm not saying Herbert's as good as Josh Allen. Josh Allen is definitively better. But again, Dwayne, nice money here, but we saw Curtis Samuel get pretty decent money in Buffalo last year. We've seen a lot of players not named Stephon Diggs get chances in Buffalo, and we just haven't seen a lot of production to just, I guess, get behind them. So Josh Palmer, someone who I think we've kept a candle on over the years, but again, I just have a hard time looking at last season when his only competition was rookie Ladd McConkey and Quentin Johnston. If he couldn't make it work then, why is Buffalo going to be any different?
I really don't understand the Bills. I mean, you've got a quarterback that you've just paid. Like, what are we doing? What are we doing? Like, and this is not like a big knock on Josh Palmer, but like, he doesn't change the complexion of your offense. He doesn't suddenly add a win to your football team. You're not getting that sort of production from Josh Palmer. Is he a nitty gritty lunch pail, good, locker room guy? I guess, maybe. I mean, and that's a nice thing to have on your team, but ultimately, like, you've got to have the guys that can go out and make the big plays in games. Can he come through clutch moments here and there, Ian? Is he a dependable player? Yeah, but he just doesn't change the way defenses are going to think about your offense. You're truly leaning into what you said, Josh Allen elevating everyone else, when really we've seen over the years, like, while quarterbacks can do that, it's still best to just go ahead and give them some weapons and then let everyone work together for the betterment of the offense. So I know this feels like Josh Palmer catching some strays here, but I mean, we're talking about a guy, Ian, that, like, when you look at his targets per route run, 16, 18, 16, those are wide receiver 5 numbers. If you look back historically since 2011, if you look at his yards per route run, 1.71, then down to 1.49 again in that same territory. So he's just not a huge difference maker. Not saying Josh Palmer can't end up having some nice weeks in fantasy this year. Probably will, depending on what happens to some of the other guys. But I don't think, even though he's going to play with Josh Allen, I don't think he's going to be a guy that you're going to want to trust in fantasy football. It's going to be one of those situations where, yeah, he occasionally lights up the box score and gives you gives you 16, 20 points, but you won't know when it's coming.
And it's one of those things where I hear Bills fans saying this actually fills a nice need for us. I mean, he's a guy that can win one-on-one at times. And I do think relative to Keon Coleman and, the other guys they have there, Khalil Shakur being more of this underneath slot maven, Curtis Samuel not exactly being someone that you just want to, again, win on that comeback route on 3rd and 8 or whatever. So we have seen flashes of that with Josh Palmer. I took the liberty of cutting up some of those plays over on the old Twitter sphere today, if you guys want to check out some of those highlights. But again, AFC Championship. You're trying to finally knock off the Chiefs. It's 3rd and 7. Do you really want Josh Palmer being the guy that you're drawing up the play for and trying to get the ball to? That's all. So again, I know it's a weaker wide receiver class. We thought guys like Josh Palmer and Darius Slayton would get more money than expected. So kudos to the Palmer family for their new riches and everything. But again, just not exactly what I was hoping for, Dwayne, in an offseason where, again, Bills have had, I think, 4 of the last 5 seasons end at the hands of the Chiefs in January. You got Josh Palmer now. Let's see if that can change it. So speaking of Darius Slayton, we still will have more talk on more free agents here on Wednesday and beyond on the Fantasy Life Show. Still have guys like Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson waiting in the wings. Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, amongst others. So make sure you guys check back again, 6 p.m. Eastern, for more free agent talk from Dwain and myself. And in the meantime, just have a great freaking rest of your day. So for Dwain, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.